Reading now from Exodus chapter 33. This is one portion of the story in Exodus, which is about, Israel had created a golden calf. And Moses intercedes on behalf of the people to save them, because God is angry enough to want to destroy them. And so Moses speaks up and advocates for Israel. And then after the fact, he's been instructed to lead these people and to guide these people. But Lord, what do I know about you? Who are you really? That's the question. And show me who you are. That's what's been happening in this reading. And Moses said to the Lord, "See, you say to me, bring up this people. Yet you have not made known to me whom you will send with me. And you have said, I know you by name, and you have also found favor in my eyes. And now if, pray, I have found favor in your eyes, let me know, pray, your ways, that I may know you, so that I may find favor in your eyes. And see, for this nation is your people." And he said, "My presence shall go, and I shall grant you rest." And he said to him, "If your presence does not go, do not take us up from here. And how then will it be known that I have found favor in your eyes, I and your people? Will it not be by your going with us that I and your people may be distinguished from every people that is on the face of the earth?" And the Lord said to Moses, "This thing too, which you have spoken, I will do, for you have found favor in my eyes, and I have known you by name." And he said, "Show me, pray, your glory." And he said, "I shall make all my goodness pass in front of you, and I shall invoke the name of the Lord before you. And I shall grant grace to whom I shall grant grace, and have compassion for whom I have compassion." And he said, "You shall not be able to see my face, for no human can see me and live." And the Lord said, "Look, there is a place with me, and you shall take your stance on the crag. And so, when my glory passes over, I shall put you in the cleft of the crag and shield you with my palm until I have passed over. And I shall take away my palm, and you will see me my back, but my face will not be seen." And the Gospel reading of Matthew chapter 22. Then the Pharisees went and plotted to entrap him in what he said. And so they sent their disciples to him along with the Herodians, saying, "Teacher, we know that you are sincere and teach the way of God in accordance with truth, and show deference to no one, for you do not regard people with partiality. Tell us then what you think. Is it lawful to pay taxes to the emperor or not?" But Moses, aware of their malice, said, "Why are you putting me to the test, you hypocrites? Show me the coin used for the tax." And they brought him a denarius. Then he said to them, "Whose head is this, and whose title?" They answered, "The emperor's." Then he said to them, "Give therefore to the emperor the things that are the emperor's, and to God the things that are God's." And when they heard this, they were amazed, and they left him and went away. This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
Well, here we are. The Pharisees and the Herodians have come to Jesus with a question to entrap him. Is it lawful to pay taxes to the emperor or not? And in order to get the full thrust of this encounter, we need to know at least three things. Who are the Pharisees and the Herodians? And what's the big deal about paying taxes, and why ask for a coin? In pairing these two together, these Pharisees with the Herodians here, they make strange bedfellows. And for these two groups to cooperate on anything is like the Republicans in Congress managing to smoothly elect a speaker in a timely fashion. The Pharisees are observers. of God's commandments. They are a grassroots movement fighting for regime change. They despise King Herod and the Roman occupation, and for their part, the Herodians, as their name indicates, they were the party that cooperated with Rome and endorsed Herod Antipas, who was the Roman puppet king placed over Israel. And hey, it made some sense. Rome, after all, had brought roads and clean water and sanitation, and there was stability, which meant there could be prosperity. Things like that, things that were important. But having these two parties both put the question of taxation to Jesus, we're seeing a political alliance of two groups who are, in every other case, always at odds with one another. So, imagine now it's campaign season. Well, it is, isn't it? It really is. We got people running for president, to be candidate for president. The journalists are everywhere. They're interviewing people. There are videos and photographs and interviews and debates. All this stuff. And it's online, it's on TV, it's out there. Imagine a candidate running for president realizing upon entering into the studio, a TV studio, that what looks like an ordinary studio audience organized by the broadcasters is actually filled with opponents who want to destroy your candidacy. Their questions are designed to manipulate you and trick you and make you look stupid, and they attack and they vilify you. They're not interested in trying to understand your policy positions. They're not really interested in listening to you and to find out what's really going on. The broadcasters, of course, are pushed back against the critics, saying these were just ordinary people voicing their concerns. The short video clips and sound bites are all produced and sent out for consumption, which could make the advertisers happier. The revenue is just climbing. And there's nothing really new about any of this, these kinds of debates, these questions. This one, which the Pharisees put to Jesus, has an obvious double edge. The issue of paying taxes to the Roman emperor, highly charged. Imagine how you'd like it if one day you were given the great privilege of paying taxes as a reward for having your land invaded and occupied by a foreign power. No doubt there would be a radicalized underground movement promoting resistance among the Roman occupation, and some of that resistance violent. That's the sort of thing which still causes riots and revolutions. We had one ourselves. And it has done just that, when Jesus was growing up in Galilee as a little boy. One of the most recent and famous Jewish leaders when Jesus was a young boy, a man called Judas the Galilean, he had called on Jews to refuse to pay the tax. And with an armed band, Judas the Galilean rode into Jerusalem to shouts of, this is familiar, to shouts of what? Hosanna, Lord, save us. Judas cleansed the temple and then declared that he was bringing a new kingdom of God as their king. Well, the Romans crushed the rebels mercilessly and leaving thousands of crosses on the sides of Judean and Galilean roads with dead and dying Jewish fathers, brothers, and sons on display, warning that paying the Roman tax was compulsory, not optional. Seeing these people hoisted up on crosses would have been a formative experience for Jesus. Now, so the Pharisees' question comes with a warning. And as they ask Jesus, what do you say? Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not? And Luke, you know how the gospel story begins, don't you? It begins by telling us about a tax levied by Caesar Augustus to make the Jews pay for their own subjugation. And the gospel story ends. Where does it end? With Pontius Pilate killing Jesus. On what charges? On the charges of claiming to be a rival king and telling his followers not to pay the tax to Caesar. Incidentally, this same tax is where we get the word gospel from. In ancient Rome, the word used, the gospel, that the word gospel referred to, was the good news announced to the people that Caesar had conquered you. And now he was not just your salad, which some of you are going to have just a little bit later today, but he's also your God. And you have the awesome privilege of paying taxes to cover the cost of his having colonized you. So this head tax, it could only be paid by with a silver denarius, which was from the Roman imperial mint. And the only way it could be paid was, and it was the only way that it could be paid. So the denarius was the equivalent of, small change. I don't know, something like a quarter. Which was what maybe a coffee once was when it was really cheap. So it's not that the tax was onerous, it wasn't. But it was offensive. The issue was real and urgent among the faithful. Are we God's people or not? To many, the tax was a knuckling under to Roman occupation and rule, and a violation of the first commandment, which says, "You shall have no other gods before me." A hated coin bearing Caesar's image contained words stamped along the edge, which proclaimed to the world who he was: Son of God, High Priest. The offensive piece of metal rendered anyone carrying it ritually unclean. So, it couldn't be carried into the temple, which was why there were money changers there setting up shop at the temple grounds for the exchange of currency, profiting off the Jews who needed that exchange in order to make an offering of worship. Early on in Matthew's Gospel, we're in chapter 22 now, way back in chapter 4, we saw how, after Jesus was baptized, how he was then in the wilderness, tempted 3 times by Jesus. You know the story, and how Jesus had pushed back against Satan and resisted those temptations 3 times. And here in chapter 22, here's where we suddenly become aware that Satan hasn't gone anywhere. Satan is still alive and well, and once more Jesus is being put to the test. This reading this morning is one of 3. 3 times tested now by the authorities in Jerusalem. Their question wasn't a genuine, it wasn't a real, honest question. They were looking to discredit Jesus, but is it really an unfair question? Jesus, the Galilean, had been leading a kingdom of God for the last 3 years, which was all about God becoming king. He'd just ridden into Jerusalem to shouts of Hosanna, Lord, save us. And he's cleansed the temple and driven out the money changers in the temple. And the only thing left for Jesus to do is to declare a revolution. To stand up to injustice, to deliver the oppressed, to cast down the principalities and powers from their thrones, to take up the sword. That's why the Pharisees and the Herodians trapped Jesus with the question about the tax. Jesus, do you want revolution or not? Come down off the fence, Jesus. Tell us where you are. And Jesus, if he had been a presidential candidate, we can imagine the audience's delight. Oh, wow, turn on your TVs. Look what's happening. And the broadcast producer's glee, you can imagine when someone asks the question, this would be dynamite. People only half-heartedly listening would suddenly bolt up off their lazy boy chairs and spilling their beers, ready to sign up for whatever they were sure would be his reply. So, if Jesus says he's not bringing a revolution, the Pharisees will get exactly what they want. Because all of Jesus' followers would think Jesus wasn't really serious about this kingdom of God stuff. They'll write him off and they'll all walk away. That's the trap. If Jesus says no, it will mean his death. If Jesus says yes, it will mean the death of his movement. taxes to Caesar or not, Jesus? Which is it? Before Jesus answers, he asks them for a coin. We watch the scene as Jesus takes the coin. He asks, who's this image? And who is it who gives himself an inscription like that? It's Caesar's, they reply. And then Jesus says, you better pay Caesar back in his own coin, hadn't you? And that was this nice bit of logic here, a clever way out of a conundrum, a piece of insight that left the crowd either dumbfounded or highly amused. I mean, and paying Caesar back in his own coin? I mean, to a lot of Jews there, it had echoes of Judas the Galilean. Hearing Jesus, these were saying the same thing, these were fighting words. It sounded like revolution. But standing there with a coin in his hand, it sounded as though he was saying, you should pay the tax. But the pivotal thing, the most important moment, is in the rest of what Jesus says. And you'd better pay God back in his own coin too. Now Jesus he's not just simply trying to escape from the jaws of a trap. He is instructing us, giving us instruction in holiness. Instruction in holiness. This is a question of holiness. What does it mean to be God's people? To be holy. What does it mean to belong to God? What, to be set apart for God in a world that puts its allegiance elsewhere, which gives itself to Caesar. In the words of the King James Bible, and so many of you probably grew up with King James, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's. I know I did. Because it's Caesar's. But render unto God what is God's, because it is God's. And that's the trick, isn't it? That's the trick. How do you do that? The trick in remembering to ask in every single encounter, whose substance are you? Whose image do you carry? Whose face? Whose motto? Whose slogan? What do people see when they see you? Phyllis Tickle is, she died maybe 12 so years ago, but she was a writer, a theologian, a preacher. She says this about the passage: if a thing is the stuff of Caesar, if it is Caesar whom a thing serves, and Caesar from whom the thing's power emanates, then render it back to Caesar. If, on the other hand, the thing is the stuff of God, if it is God whom the event, the action, the decision, even the thought or word before us serves, and God from whom its power emanates, then render it back to God. Miroslav, a theologian, a writer, writes this: give to the emperor the things that are the emperor's, and to God the things that are God's. Therefore, never give to the emperor things that are God's. No glory, no ultimate trust, no full allegiance, no pledge of loyalty, no promise of doing what one is told. C.S. Lewis writes, he who surrenders himself without reservation to the temporal claims of a nation or a party or a class is rendering to Caesar that which of all things most emphatically belongs to God, which is himself. So this is the challenge, and this is unendingly difficult. We know that discerning what is Caesar's from what is God's is not so simple as it sounds. It's certainly not so infrequent or so simple an exercise as it was when there was a coin in hand with the words and signs of ownership already printed on it. With Caesar as an alien power, we live in a world very different than the one Jesus lived in as empowered citizens. and Christians simultaneously. We spend a great deal of our thinking and our political arguing every day on this issue the Pharisees raise. To whom or to what do we give our loyalty and allegiance? Whose image do we bear? We aren't ruled by authoritarian autocrats or dictators. We are still living in a democracy. And in a democracy, there is no Caesar, no emperor, which merely means that here we, the people, get to cast our own votes and to be our own tyrants. Jesus, it appears, here in Matthew's Gospel, would have us do our rendering today. First, by asking the questions of whose substance are you? Whose image do you carry? Whose face? Whose motto? Whose slogan? And then to dare us to imagine what it looks like to be holy and what it looks like to be an image bearer, to be truly human, a caretaker of God's creation. And to be honest, this is often excruciatingly difficult. Imagine 15 days ago, you don't have to imagine this. 15 days ago, an attack on Israel by the terrorist organization Hamas. And it was a crime which targeted Israel, but which now involves both Israel and Palestinian people. It's really kind of weird, though, on that Sabbath day, the attack, the readings in the synagogue were from Genesis chapter 6. In Genesis 1 and 2, humanity is created in the image of God and charged as caretakers whose job it was to care for and expand the garden. And God, the first commandment that God gives to humanity, to be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. And God's intention was to fill the world with life and the human creature to be caretakers of the life of the world. And Genesis 6 begins with humanity having lots of kids. That's what we're supposed to be doing, but what happens is the human creature corrupts his role as caretaker, twists it out of shape. And the command to be fruitful and multiply is corrupted and twisted to evil. In Genesis chapter 6 tells the story about the human creature filling the world with violence instead. Instead of humanity proliferating, we have evil proliferating, and the land is filled with violence. So it's just one of those weird coincidences that the reading on that Sabbath day, when Hamas attacked Israel, it's all about Shema Hamas. I don't know what I said, suddenly that makes no sense, but the Hebrew word for violence is Hamas. And the word, which is not Arabic, by the way, so it doesn't mean the same thing as Hamas does. But it's just remarkable that they were almost phonetically identical, the Hebrew and the Arabic. But the word translated Hamas, violence, evil. The Lord saw the evil of the human creature that was great upon the earth. And of course, the current iteration of Hamas didn't look to Genesis and name themselves after it. It's just a chilling statement where they seem to be identical but aren't, in a world on fire with violence. And God is grieved and reacts to the violence upon the earth in chapter 6 of Genesis, saying he's going to destroy the earth because the earth was corrupted. The human race had twisted the world out of shape and corrupted the world through violence. And we see that happening today. Of course, it's nothing new. It's always been happening. What I'm saying is this. I'm saying all this because what I see happening over and over again in so much of what our media wants to give us is violence. The filling of the earth. And we miss so many more of those stories of life. Of life filling the earth. We see the violence, we're tuned into the violence, we can take it in and we're taken in by the violence to the extent that it's all that we see. It's what sells in our news, so it's what we're given to see. And we miss the life that's there. We have to be taught to see the good that's being sown upon the earth. We have to be taught to dare to imagine what it looks like to be holy like God, to render unto God. We have to be taught what it looks like to be an image bearer, to be human, truly human, a caretaker of God's creation in a world of violence. The stories coming out of Israel, I think I have 4, but 2 about Israel and 2 about us. The stories coming out of Israel are devastating, but also astonishingly heartening. I mean, it's all very early, and so this is heartrending. But there are still their stories, good, wonderful stories happening. A young boy was to celebrate his bar mitzvah, living in a kibbutz in southern Israel. They were going to celebrate his bar mitzvah. But then the attack upon his village, in which he lost his best friend. And the next day, his house, because it had been struck and destroyed by a missile. What do you do? What do they do in the face of such evil? What does holiness look like? When the world is filled with such evil, they choose to simply refuse to postpone the happy occasion of his bar mitzvah. What does it look like? The holiness of God. It looks like the whole village turning out for a young boy, with the young boy to celebrate his bar mitzvah, even in the face of great evil. Thou preparest a table before me, says the psalmist, in the face of my enemies. There's another story. This one has to do with the wedding. Everybody has fled. They've gone north. A lot of the refugees now find themselves in Jerusalem. How do you counter this overwhelming obstacle of death and mourning? Nobody wants to have a wedding. Nobody wants to sing. Nobody is looking for joy. The bride never imagined her wedding to be like this and doesn't want this wedding. Surely evil gets the last word. But sometimes the obstacle is the way forward. We are going to have a wedding. And they have the wedding and they invite everybody to be there. They're all scattered everywhere. Many people from the village make it there. Strangers, though, come in and are invited. Evacuees from the south. They're all celebrating. And a woman approaches the bride under the pelican and wanted to give her a brachus. I'm not going to fool with definitions, but you get the sense. Usually a brachus is given by the parent, but this woman wants to give her a brachus. And she told her story, and she said, last week we were in the south, and we woke up on that morning, and I said to my husband, there are 2 soldiers outside our garden. And the husband looked out the window and said, those aren't Israeli guns. Close the windows, get to the safe room. And we all went to the safe room, and the terrorists, pretending to be Israeli soldiers in order to fool the villagers, came into the house and rampaged through the house, but they didn't find us. We survived because my husband was sharp enough to recognize the weapons were not Israeli weapons. And she said to the bride, last week I had terrorists rampaging through my house. This week I'm here to give you a blessing and to bless your new life as joining you together with your husband. Now it feels, we have to push against the inertia within us because we don't want this at the moment. We're not ready for this in the moment, and it feels very counterintuitive. But in the face of great evil, we are to celebrate life, to render unto God the things that are God's. Now, we kind of actually do this intuitively anyway. During a natural disaster, hurricanes, floods, drought, tornadoes, people pull together. And everybody wants to help, and then suddenly all those divisions and debates about our differences drop away. Suddenly we drop all our labels for one another, and we pitch in and we're helping each other, and suddenly we're coming together, and there's this building of connection and unity. Whereas before we were all we were all at odds with one another, but then we come out of ourselves and out of our partisanship and out of our safe circles, and we put ourselves out there in the world to be a force for good. Now about Walhalla. last year we had that wonderful event, Rise Against Hunger, in February last year. And we prepared 18,000 meals and going to communities, not just a one-time, you're fed today and tomorrow, well, I hope you get some food from somewhere. But the great, the Rise Against Hunger partners with other groups, other organizations to supply the resources to villages and families that will allow them to have the resources themselves to do what they need to take care of themselves and to raise up their own communities. So, and we did that last year, and that's just a small glimpse of what it looks like, rendering unto God the things that are God's. And we're doing that. And last week, while I spent a whole week celebrating Naomi Callister's birthday, it was fun and entertaining and kind of humorous that we made a whole week out of it. But rendering unto God the things that are God's. And on Friday, I want to mention something about Walhalla Rotary, because I know you don't realize this. Perhaps you don't realize this, but Walhalla Rotary is part of your mission. I mean, it's not in our budget, but we've got 6 people in Rotary, and Friday, Rotary raised over $12,000 for Petals Possible, specialized bikes placed in schools for disabled children. And they cost $4,000 a piece. We were hoping we might be able to raise $4,000. The Rotary raised 12 and plus more. So we can now place 3 bikes in 3 different elementary schools to be used for students in those schools. And the goal is we've got 7 more to go, because there are 10 elementary schools in Oconee County. $40,000 will be is the goal. And this is how we redeem the tongue from the evil in this world. How we restore what is lost and damaged. It's how we protect our souls from the cynicism and nihilism that's inside each one of us, because if the violence is all we have, if it's all we are given to see, if it's all there as the one thing that's there before us all the time, then hate is going to take over our lives. It's going to contaminate every cell and every molecular structure within the body. Like literally, you are dirty and you can't wash it off. But by refusing to put off joy, put off the celebration of life, we are washing ourselves clean from the evil. Instead of division and barriers, there is community. Instead of hatred and bitterness, there is love. And I know this all sounds cliche. It's like subscribing to the Walmart channel and watching all those wonderful Walmart stories about boy meets girl. But it's not. In real life, we know real life is much more complicated. But in real life, this is wonderful. This isn't cliche. It's rendering unto God what is God's. And I offer this to you in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. Let's pray.